The story begins where the waves meet the dead silence of Maine's coastline. Locals call it Whispering Shore, not because of the sea's soft hum, but because of what they hear after dark. A low, trembling voice that doesn't belong to the living. For decades, this stretch of beach near Bar Harbor looked like any other postcard perfect view of New England. Fishermen swore the waters there never rested, and in the evenings the gulls grew quiet, as if waiting. Then, in late October, everything changed. The first body washed ashore on the 29th, a young woman, early 30s, her hands folded as if someone had placed them there. No ID, no missing persons report, just seaweed tangled in her hair and a faint carving on her wrist, a series of numbers that led nowhere. 2 days later, a second body appeared, this time a local fisherman gone missing weeks before. Same markings, same eerie calm surrounding the scene. Police cordoned off the beach, but the town was already spiraling. People whispered of the voice beneath, a ghostly echo said to call from the tide, luring the lost to their end. At night, when the wind hit the cliffs just right, you could almost hear it. That whisper, a name, maybe, or a warning. The shore wasn't just keeping secrets anymore. It was speaking. Before we dive deeper into what the tides brought back, if these stories of whispers and waves haunt your thoughts, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. Detectives arrived before dawn, their flashlights slicing through the fog that rolled off the Atlantic like breath from something alive. The scene was too clean. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, just the bodies left with surgical precision at the edge of the surf, as if the ocean itself had delivered them. By noon, the FBI had joined local police. The woman's autopsy revealed no water in her lungs. She hadn't drowned. She was dead before she ever touched the sea. The fisherman's body told the same story, yet both showed traces of salt deep within their bloodstream, an impossible detail that baffled the coroner. Investigators combed the shoreline for clues. What they found instead were glass bottles, dozens of them, washed up and buried in the sand. Inside each one, a note. The handwriting was the same, blocky, deliberate, written with a trembling hand. Each message began the same way. You should have listened. The news spread faster than the tide itself. Reporters called it the Whispering Shore Mystery. Tourists canceled their stays. Locals began locking their doors before sunset. And as the waves continued to bring new things ashore, scraps of clothing, a photograph burned at the edges, a child's shoe, the whispers grew bolder. Every night around 3, residents near the cliffs claimed to hear footsteps on the rocks, followed by the faint crack of glass and the low hum of a woman's voice, almost like she was singing from beneath the water. The ocean was no longer giving up its dead. It was returning what was taken. 2 weeks after the second body surfaced, the investigation took a darker turn. Detectives uncovered a string of missing persons stretching back nearly a decade. All women, all vanishing near the same stretch of coast. 4 names stood out: Rachel Moore, Lydia Kane, Harper Wells, and Erin Black. Each disappeared exactly 1 year apart, each on the same night, October 29th. Locals had long chalked it up to coincidence or the cruelty of the sea. But when investigators dug deeper, a chilling link emerged. All 4 women once worked at a now abandoned inn overlooking the water, the Mariner's Rest. Closed in 2015 after a fire, it had since become a ruin wrapped in fog and superstition. Inside the inn's crumbling walls, police found something the waves hadn't erased: a secret basement sealed behind a false wall in the cellar. Inside were relics of the missing, a necklace belonging to Rachel, a work ID for Harper, and an old photograph of all 4 women standing beside a man no one recognized. The image was water-damaged, the man's face partially melted by time, but his eyes were sharp, cold, and watching. By now, residents whispered of a curse, parents warned their children not to walk past the inn after dark. One woman who'd grown up in Bar Harbor claimed she saw the four women standing at the shoreline at night, their figures barely visible under the moonlight, facing the sea like they were waiting for someone to return. Police brushed it off as hysteria, but when they played back security footage from the beach patrol that same night, the cameras showed something. Four faint silhouettes moving against the tide, dissolving with the morning mist. It wasn't just the sea keeping its dead close. It was the past, clawing its way back to the surface. Days blurred into nights as the investigation spread inland. The tide had calmed, but the horror had only deepened. While searching the cliffs near the Mariner's Rest, a forensic team unearthed something strange beneath the roots of an old birch tree. A partial skeleton, arranged with eerie precision. Each bone had been placed to form a pattern, almost like a map. The coroner noted that the remains belonged to more than one person. Femurs, ribs, fragments of skull, all from different victims bound together by thin cords of kelp that had long since dried and stiffened. Someone had taken the time to build this piece by piece and bury it exactly where the roots met the stone. At first, investigators assumed it was ritualistic, but when they overlaid the bone arrangement onto a map of the coastline, something clicked. The placement aligned perfectly with the locations where each of the four women had last been seen. The bones, it seemed, were pointing toward the ocean, toward a hidden point marked only by tide patterns and the whisper of waves. That night, divers were sent into the cold black water near the cliffs. What they found made even the most seasoned officers turn pale. Rusted chains, fragments of clothing, a submerged metal box half buried in silt. Inside, a handful of human teeth, a wedding ring, and a small brass key engraved with a single initial, M. The media dubbed it the Map of Bones. Forensic analysts couldn't explain the pattern, nor why the bones had been arranged in such deliberate symmetry. But one detective, staring at the recovered key, muttered a phrase that no one forgot. Someone wanted to be found, just not alive. As news of the Map of Bones spread, Bar Harbor became a ghost town. Tourists avoided the coast, and locals stopped speaking to strangers. But the investigation pressed on, following the few clues left behind, and one in particular led them deep into the woods. A search team found a narrow trail, half hidden by moss and fog, branching off from the cliffs. At first it looked like an old hiking path, but as they followed it, the air grew colder. The birds went silent, and then the ground changed. Soft, almost hollow. They were walking over something. Underneath the topsoil, investigators uncovered rows of wooden stakes wrapped with torn bits of fabric. Blue uniforms, the kind worn by staff at the Mariner's Rest. Each stake was marked with a number burned into the wood, 1 through 4. Then a fifth, freshly placed, its number incomplete, the burn still faintly warm. That fifth marker was less than a week old. At the end of the trail stood a cabin, long abandoned, windows boarded, roof sagging under years of decay. But inside, dust told a different story, footprints too recent, food wrappers too clean. Whoever had been here wasn't gone long. Pinned to the wall above a cracked mirror was a piece of paper, written in the same trembling hand as the bottle notes found on the beach. The sea keeps what we give it. The writing was shaky, as though the author had been crying or laughing. And in the corner of the paper, someone had drawn a crude map leading back toward the ocean, ending with a single word scrawled in red ink. Below. Whatever had started on the shore wasn't over. It was moving inland, and the trail was leading them straight back to where it began, the Whispering Sea. Detectives finally had a face, a name, and a story that no one wanted to believe. The man from the photograph, the one standing with the 4 missing women, was identified as Michael Arden, the former maintenance supervisor at the Mariner's Rest. Fired months before the inn's mysterious fire, he vanished soon after, leaving behind unpaid rent and a trail of cryptic journal entries. When investigators dug into his past, they found a pattern of obsession, sketches of the hotel's floor plans, coded notes about the foundation, and one phrase repeated over and over: "Everything returns to the shore." Michael wasn't just a drifter, he was an architect. Before taking the maintenance job, he'd worked on coastal infrastructure, seawalls, drainage tunnels, and emergency flood channels. He knew how the land beneath the inn was built. More importantly, he knew how to hide within it. When they reopened the ruins of the Mariner's Rest, they found what he had left behind, a secret tunnel beneath the cellar, reinforced with steel and concrete. The entrance was sealed by rusted bolts and salt deposits, as if the sea itself had tried to reclaim it. Inside the tunnel, the air smelled of decay and ocean brine. The walls were lined with drawings, sketches of the missing women, their faces serene, surrounded by water. Halfway down the tunnel, investigators found a chamber carved into the stone. Chains hung from the ceiling. A single chair sat in the middle, its frame corroded by moisture. And on the wall behind it, etched deep into the rock, were the same numbers found on the woman's wrist, coordinates. Those numbers pointed to a spot just offshore, beneath the crashing waves, a place divers had already searched, but never deep enough. The whispers of the town weren't superstition anymore. They were echoes of something real, something built. The breakthrough came not from a confession, but from a fragment, a single hair recovered from inside the tunnel's rusted chair. At first, the lab dismissed it as contamination, but when they ran the DNA, the results sent a chill through the entire investigation. It belonged to Erin Black, one of the 4 missing women. The impossible part? The DNA was fresh, no more than a few weeks old. It was as if Erin had been there recently. The forensic team reran the test 3 times, same result. The woman who vanished in 2014 had somehow left evidence in a tunnel sealed for nearly a decade. It made no sense until they discovered something else. Traces of another DNA strand, partially degraded but familiar. Michael Arden's. The 2 profiles overlapped on multiple samples, under the chair bolts, on the walls, even on the glass jars found in the chamber. It wasn't just that Michael had been there. It was as though he'd been with them long after their deaths. The locals had already begun calling it the DNA Whisper, the case that spoke through blood instead of words. Some said Erin's spirit was reaching out, forcing her story to surface. Others believed Michael was still alive, experimenting with ways to preserve fragments of the women, keeping them tied to the sea forever. When one detective visited the beach that night, standing where the first body had been found, she swore she heard her name whispered from the waves. Not by a voice, but by something deeper, like the ocean itself was breathing secrets back into the air. The science said it was contamination. The tide said otherwise. It was storm season when they found the final clue. The sea had been violent for days, tearing at the cliffs like it was trying to unbury something. Then, on November 2nd, a landslide near the Mariner's Rest exposed a hidden section of the tunnel system no one had mapped. It wasn't concrete this time. It was wood, reinforced by corroded hinges and a lock that looked centuries old. Behind that door lay a chamber completely dry despite years of flooding. The walls were lined with mirrors, warped and fogged by age, reflecting the flashlights like eyes in the dark. At the center sat an altar, a table covered in sea glass, bone fragments and rusted tools. Above it, carved into the beam, were the words, "Those who return, remember." The air was suffocating, heavy with salt and something chemical. On the far wall, investigators found Michael Arden's final message, painted in black oil across the mirrors so that the words fractured endlessly in reflection. "The tide does not take." It trades pinned beneath the message was a faded photograph. The same four women, but this time one more figure stood among them. The detective who had led the case, her face young, unlined, smiling. She had been a waitress at the Mariner's Rest years before the first disappearance. The realization hit like the cold of the sea. This wasn't just Michael's secret. Someone inside the investigation had been part of the story all along. As thunder rolled over the shore, the hinges groaned. The old door creaked open wider on its own, and the sound that came from within wasn't wind. It was whispering. Before we uncover the truth hiding behind the faces of the living, if this story has kept your heart racing and your mind searching, pause for a moment, like, share, and subscribe to Unsolved Unveiled. The revelation shattered everything. Detective Laura Hensley, who had become the public face of the Whispering Shore investigation, was suddenly a suspect. Reporters swarmed her house. The internet turned into a frenzy of theories, some claiming she was Michael Arden's accomplice, others saying she was the architect all along. When confronted, Laura didn't deny her past. She admitted she'd worked at the Mariner's Rest briefly in 2013, the same year the first woman, Rachel Moore, vanished. But she swore she left before anything strange happened. The problem was the photograph. It placed her at the inn with all four victims and Michael. Police raided her home. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Behind a false wall in her basement, they discovered boxes of evidence that had gone missing from the case files, bottle messages, jewelry, even the brass key marked M, each item labeled and preserved like trophies. When asked why, she said quietly, "Because someone has to remember them." The sea forgets, but her calm cracked when investigators mentioned the DNA results. Her voice trembled, her hands shook. "You think you know what happened down there," she said, "but you don't. You think he built that place? He didn't. He just finished it." Her words froze the room. If Michael Arden wasn't the true architect, then who was? As Laura was taken into custody, a storm began rising over Bar Harbor again. The tides crashed against the cliffs, louder, closer, like the ocean itself was listening. And through the howling wind, some officers swore they heard a faint, rhythmic tapping, metal against stone, echoing from somewhere below the inn. It sounded like someone knocking, to be let out. The night detective Laura Hensley was arrested. The ocean refused to sleep. Waves clawed at the shore as if trying to drag the whole town under. Power lines sparked, sirens wailed through the fog, and in the chaos, something began to rise from beneath the Mariner's Rest. Not a body, but sound. Divers stationed offshore reported hearing faint human voices transmitted through their comms, whispers beneath static, saying names. Rachel, Lydia, Harper Aaron, each voice distinct, layered, repeating the same phrase. "He's not gone." At first, the department dismissed it as interference from the storm. But when the divers surfaced, their equipment showed no sign of malfunction. The voices had been recorded. Played back in the quiet of the lab, the whispers grew clearer, and underneath them another voice emerged, low and deliberate. "Below." Meanwhile, in her cell, Laura began to scream. Guards found her trembling, clutching her ears, whispering through tears. "They're not dead. They're under the tide. He's calling them back." The next morning, the beach patrol discovered something new in the sand. 5 sets of footprints leading from the waterline toward the cliffs. The 5th set ended abruptly, vanishing at the entrance of the tunnel where the old door had been. The town sealed the area, but locals said it was useless. At night, the whispers carried across the harbor. Some swore they saw figures standing on the rocks, staring out to sea, waiting for the tide to speak again. The dead, it seemed, weren't haunting the living. They were answering a call. The trial began in winter when Bar Harbor lay buried under a sheet of white, a ghost of its former self. The courtroom filled with silence so thick it felt like fog from the ocean had followed everyone inside. Cameras rolled, reporters whispered about curses, and at the center of it all sat Laura Hensley, pale, hollow-eyed, her wrists cuffed but her gaze distant, like she was still listening to something no one else could hear. The prosecution painted her as a monster in uniform, obsessed with preserving the dead. They said she and Michael Arden had lured women to the inn under the guise of helping them find work, then sacrificed them to some ritualistic fantasy tied to the tides. They had their evidence, the bones, the artifacts, the notes. But when the defense began, everything turned stranger. Laura's lawyer played the diver's audio, the recorded whispers from beneath the sea. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge froze as the faint voices echoed through the speakers, the women's names repeating, blending into a single chilling phrase. "He's still building." The lawyer argued that Laura was a pawn, a survivor of the same nightmare, manipulated by the true architect. The DNA evidence, he claimed, proved she'd been inside the tunnels recently, not to hide a crime, but to stop one from happening again. Then Laura spoke for the first time in weeks. Her voice was steady but hollow. "He's not gone. He's where the water meets the stone. You can lock me up, but the tide won't stop." The jury watched her in silence, their faces pale. That night, when the courthouse emptied, janitors found wet footprints leading down the main hallway toward the exit. No leaks, no rain. Just the faint scent of salt in the air and a whisper caught on one of the security cameras. It said, "Below." Months passed. The trial ended with Laura Hensley declared guilty on multiple counts, though no one left the courthouse certain of what she was truly guilty of. Some said murder, others conspiracy. A few whispered insanity. She was sent to a high-security facility upstate. But even there, strange things began to happen. Nurses reported saltwater stains appearing on her cell walls overnight. Guards complained of hearing footsteps in the empty corridor outside her door. And Laura herself, calm, quiet, resigned, began speaking to the air as if answering questions no one else could hear. Meanwhile, in Bar Harbor, storms battered the coast again. The sea tore open new scars along the cliffs near the Mariner's Rest. One morning, after a particularly violent tide, locals found something washed up on the beach, a brass key, glinting wet in the gray light. The same one marked M. Divers sent to recheck the tunnels discovered they had changed. Passages once sealed were now open. The floor had shifted, revealing what looked like a staircase descending into the bedrock itself. They followed it down until the signal from their cameras cut out, but not before one final image flickered on screen. 4 figures standing at the bottom of the steps, facing the camera, motionless in the dark. The feed went black. Weeks later, tourists began to return to the coast, unaware of what the tides had taken, or what they had given back. The beach looked calm again, almost peaceful. But when the wind rose at night, the waves seemed to murmur faintly, carrying voices through the fog. Locals no longer call it Whispering Shore. They call it what it's always been, a grave that still speaks.